My name is Leo. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the building superintendent for a pre-war apartment block in the city. And this is the story of how a complete stranger walked into my basement workshop, looked me dead in the eye, and said 5 words that changed my entire world. Marry me for 6 months. I stared at her, the smell of ozone and old pipes thick in the air around us. I thought it was a joke, a prank, maybe a dare from one of the university students on the 4th floor. I almost said no. I almost told her to get lost. But I didn't. And that is how I met my wife. Let me back up. Before her, my life was measured in cycles. The hum of the boiler in winter, the groan of the air conditioning units in summer, the endless, quiet rotation of maintenance, repairs, and preventative checks. My world was the bones of the building, the plumbing, the wiring, the concrete foundation. It was a world of tangible problems with tangible solutions.
Lus faucet, blån fivs, klögd druin.
I could fix those things. I was good at it. People, on the other hand, people were a mystery, a tangled mess of wires I couldn't diagram. So I stopped trying. For the last 10 years, I had lived in the building's basement apartment. It was more of a workshop with a cot, really. A concrete cavern of order and control. Everything had its place. Wrenches hung in descending size. Screws were sorted in labeled plastic bins. There was a logic to it, a peace. It was my fortress. My tomb. I was a ghost. The tenants knew me as the guy who fixed the radiator or plunged the sink. A polite nod in the hallway. A brief, functional conversation. They didn't know my last name. They didn't know what I did on my days off, which was mostly just sit in my workshop and listen to the building breathe. I had become as much a part of the infrastructure as the copper pipes I so carefully maintained. Functional. Necessary. Unseen. I wasn't always this way. I used to have plans. I used to feel things. But that was before my dad died. He had a heart attack on a Tuesday. He was 52. He was a mechanic, a man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, and he had a heart as big and roaring as the engines he loved. One minute he was under the hood of a vintage Mustang, the next he was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening. I was 22, and the floor of my world just dropped away. I tried to be the man of the house. I tried to hold it all together for my mom, but her grief was a fortress I couldn't breach. We became 2 ghosts haunting the same house, rattling our separate chains of sorrow. The connection between us, once so easy, became another broken thing I didn't know how to fix. A few years after that, I met Chloe. She was vibrant and loud and full of a light I thought might be able to reach me in the gray fog I lived in. For a while it worked, or I thought it did. But my quietness, my steadiness, began to grate on her. She called it a lack of passion. "It's like you're switched off, Leo," she told me the night she left. "You're all function, no feeling. You fix things. You provide a stable surface. But you're not in it. You're not really here." She said I was boring. Stuck. A man who was content to live in a basement. She wasn't entirely wrong. Her words were just the final turn of a screw that had been tightening for years. They confirmed what I already suspected. I was broken, a faulty piece of equipment. So I retreated. I stopped wanting things. I stopped trying to connect. It was safer to be a ghost. Safer to tend to pipes and wires, things that wouldn't judge you for being quiet, things that wouldn't leave. My father had this saying. He'd be standing there, wiping his hands on an old rag, looking at a bolt that had been stripped by someone trying to force it. "Son," he'd say, his voice calm and steady. "Some things you can't force. You can't force a stripped bolt, and you can't force a person's will. You just have to be the wall that stands firm, so the storm has nothing to break but itself. You earn trust. You don't break a spirit." I held on to those words. They became my operating manual. Don't force things. Be steady. Be a wall. It was the one piece of him I could still access, the one bit of his code I could run in my own broken system. If you believe that sometimes the quietest people have the most to give, that sometimes showing up is the most heroic thing a person can do, then you should subscribe. This channel is full of stories that prove it. And so there she was, Clara. She was a tenant from 3B. I'd seen her around. She always seemed to be in a hurry, a frown line etched between her brows, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked like she was carrying the weight of the world, and it was winning. Now she was standing in my world, a splash of color and chaos in my gray, orderly space. Her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. I know this is insane, she started, her voice trembling slightly. Believe me, I know. This is the last thing I ever thought I'd do. I just waited. I was good at waiting. My sister Maya, she began, the name catching in her throat. She has a severe autoimmune disease, lupus. It affects everything. Her joints, her kidneys, her ability to handle stress. She needs calm. She needs stability. It's not just a preference. It's a medical necessity. I nodded slowly, wiping my hands on a rag out of habit. It was what my dad always did. Our parents. They mean well, she continued, the words coming out in a rush now. But they're overbearing. They think she should be at home with them, wrapped in cotton wool. But their house is chaos. Constant drama. It would make her sick. So Maya lives with me. I manage her care, her environment. It works. She took a shaky breath. But they don't see it that way. And my ex-boyfriend, Julian, is making it worse. Julian. I'd seen him too. A man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. All perfect teeth and expensive suits. He always had a hand on Clara's arm. A proprietary air about him, even after I heard they'd broken up. Julian has convinced them that I'm unstable, she said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. That I'm a bad influence. That I'm too emotional and flighty to be a proper guardian for Maya. He's positioned himself as the savior, the one with a plan to get Maya the right care. What's the right care? I asked, my voice rusty from disuse. His care, she said, the look on her face clarifying everything. It was about control. He wants to manage her, isolate her. He always did. He hated how close Maya and I are. He hated that I had a life and a focus that wasn't him. So my parents, with Julian whispering in their ear, have given me an ultimatum. They're threatening to sue for guardianship. They think I'm a mess. A single woman in a one-bedroom apartment who can't hold her life together. They told me I had to prove I had a stable, normal life. And to them, that means a husband. The word hung in the air between us, as heavy and cold as a lead pipe. A husband, I repeated flatly. The fastest, most undeniable proof of stability they would understand, she confirmed, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. There's a family trust. It matures on Maya's 21st birthday, which is in 6 months. With that money, we can be free of them. Free of Julian. We can get a bigger place, a proper setup for her. But until then,
I'm trapped.
She looked at me, her eyes pleading. They were the color of moss after a rainstorm. I know it's crazy, but you're quiet. You're steady. You're the most stable person in this entire building. No drama. No noise. You just exist. You're dependable. I see you helping Mr. Henderson with his groceries. I see you fixing the hinge on Mrs. Gable's door at 10 o'clock at night. You're kind. Her assessment of me felt like an X-ray. She saw the function, but she called it kindness. I will pay you, she said quickly. I have some savings. We can draw up a contract. It's a business arrangement. 6 months. We get a marriage license, show it to my parents. We act the part when we have to. After 6 months, we get a quiet divorce. No one ever has to know. My mind was screaming at me to say no. This was the opposite of my ordered, controlled world. This was chaos. This was people. This was a tangled mess of wires I had no business touching. But then I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the exhaustion. I saw the fierce, desperate love for her sister that was holding her together. She wasn't asking me to fix her. She was asking me to be a wall. You just have to be the wall that stands firm so the storm has nothing to break but itself. My dad's voice, clear as a bell. The storm was Julian. It was her parents. And Clara was standing in the middle of it, about to be broken. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of metal and possibility. Okay, I said. Her whole body sagged with relief. Really? Okay, I repeated, a little firmer this time. No contract. No money. I'll help you. And just like that, I stepped out of the basement and into her life. The next few weeks were a blur of invention. We had to build a life out of thin air. A history that could withstand the scrutiny of her family, and more importantly, of Julian. We met in the evenings, sometimes in her apartment, which was filled with plants and books and smelled like lemon and lavender. Sometimes in my workshop, where she'd perch on a stool, looking strangely at home amongst the tools and machinery. Okay, where did we meet? She'd ask, a notepad in her lap. The farmer's market, I suggested, pulling a memory from years ago. I was buying tomatoes. You were buying basil for Maya's pesto. We reached for the same bunch. It was a scene from a movie I'd half-watched once, but it sounded plausible. Good, she said, scribbling it down. First date. A walk by the canal, she offered. It was that first warm day in April. We got coffee. You told me about how the city's water system works. She smiled a little. You probably would. I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. You told me the Latin names of all the weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement. Deal, she laughed. And for a moment, the frown line between her brows disappeared. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing. We started actually talking. The fake stories became doorways to real ones. My story about the farmer's market led to me telling her about my mom's garden, about the way my dad would eat cherry tomatoes straight from the vine, warm from the sun. It was the first time I'd talked about him without a knot of ice forming in my stomach. Clara listened. She didn't offer platitudes or tilt her head with pity. She just listened, her moss-green eyes focused on me, and it felt like something inside me, a rusted-shut valve, creaked open just a little. She told me about Maya, not just the illness but the person. Maya's wicked sense of humor, her talent for drawing, her obsession with documentaries about extreme environments. She spoke of her sister with a love so fierce and bright it was like staring into the sun. She told me about her own dream, the one she'd put on hold. A small, specialized plant nursery. A place for rare and difficult plants. I like the ones that are hard to keep alive, she confessed one night, her voice soft. The ones everyone else gives up on. I was beginning to understand why. I was coming back to life. I started noticing things again. The way the afternoon light hit the brick in the alleyway. The taste of the coffee from the shop on the corner. The sound of Clara's laugh. My gray world was slowly, imperceptibly, being saturated with color. I was still fixing pipes and wires, but now I was thinking about what story I would tell Clara about my day. My life was still functional, but it was starting to have feeling again. Then came the moment of seeing. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was replacing a section of worn-out pipe in the laundry room when I looked out the small, ground-level window into the building's courtyard. Mr. Henderson, a tenant in his late 80s who lived on a meager pension, was walking slowly across the paving stones, a paper bag of groceries in his arms. Suddenly, the bottom of the bag gave way. An orange went rolling. A can of soup clattered on the stones. A carton of eggs smashed open. A sad yellow puddle on the gray. I saw Mr. Henderson's shoulders slump in defeat. He just stood there, staring at the mess, looking utterly lost. I started to get up, to go out and help, but before I could move, a flash of movement caught my eye. It was Clara. She had been on her way out of the building, phone in hand, clearly in a hurry. But she stopped. She put her phone away, walked over to Mr. Henderson, and knelt. She didn't say much. She just started picking things up. She rescued the salvageable items, murmured something reassuring about the eggs, and then she did something I didn't expect. She gathered the remaining groceries, took Mr. Henderson by the arm, and walked him back into the building. I was curious. I went to the basement door that led into the main first-floor hallway. I saw them get on the elevator. A few minutes later, I walked up to the second floor, feigning an inspection of the fire extinguisher. His apartment door was slightly ajar. I could hear their voices. I peeked through the crack. Clara had put his groceries away, and now she was in his small, tidy kitchen, making him a cup of tea. She brought it to him in the living room, sat down in the armchair opposite him, and just sat. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't rushing. She was just being present, listening to him talk about his late wife. No one was watching. She didn't know I was there. This wasn't a performance. It was just who she was. Kind. In that moment, standing in the quiet hallway, I knew. This wasn't a transaction anymore. This wasn't me helping a stranger. I was on her side. All the way. Whatever storm came, I would be the wall. The storm arrived a week later, and its name was Julian. Clara and I were in her apartment, finalizing the proposal story for her parents. We had bought a simple, thin silver band for her to wear. It felt impossibly real on her finger. There was a sharp, confident knock on the door. Clara froze. "I'm not expecting anyone." She opened it, and there he was. Julian. He was even more polished up close. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Clara, darling," he said, his voice smooth as silk. He glanced past her and saw me standing in the living room. His smile tightened. "And you must be the guy. The superintendent." He said the word, superintendent, like it was something he'd scraped off his shoe. He walked in without being invited, his gaze sweeping the apartment before landing on me. He looked me up and down, a clear, dismissive appraisal. The message was obvious. You are no competition for me. "Julian, what are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "Your mother called. Worried, of course. She told me your news. I had to see for myself," he said, his eyes flicking to the ring on her finger. "Quite the development. A little sudden, don't you think?" He turned his attention back to me. "So, where did you two lovebirds meet?" Clara's stories have a tendency to change, you know. It's hard to keep track. It was a test, a direct challenge. I could feel Clara tense beside me. The air was charged with his condescending aggression. I could have matched it. I could have told him to get out. But that would be forcing it. That would just create a bigger fight. More drama for Clara to endure. Be the wall. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't puff out my chest. I just took a half step closer to Clara and rested my hand on the small of her back. A simple, solid point of contact. I felt her take a small, steadying breath. "The farmer's market," I said, my voice even and calm. "In May." She was buying basil. My calmness seemed to wrong-foot him. He was expecting a confrontation. He was built for it. He didn't know what to do with quiet sincerity. "The farmer's market," he repeated, a sneer in his voice. How quaint. He circled me like a shark. "And what is it you do again? You fix things?" "Yes," I said. "I fix things." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Well, you've certainly got your work cut out for you here." He gestured vaguely at Clara. That was it, the line. But I still didn't shout. "Clara's not broken," I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge of cold steel I hadn't used in years. "And this is her apartment. I think it's time for you to leave." I didn't move. I just stood there, my hand on her back, a solid, unmovable object. The wall. Julian stared at me, his mask of charm slipping. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't expected. He was used to people who fought back, who got flustered, who gave him ammunition. He had nothing to use against my stillness. The storm had nothing to break. He gave another short, humorless laugh, straightened his tie, and looked at Clara. "Call me when you come to your senses." And then he was gone. The moment the door clicked shut, Clara sagged against it, letting out a long, shuddering breath. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Thank you," she whispered. I just nodded, my hand still resting on her back. "I'm here." The high-stakes event, the final showdown, was Maya's 21st birthday party. It was held in the stuffy, formal living room of her parents' house, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. The air was thick with polite tension and the scent of wilting lilies. Julian was there, of course, hovering near Clara's parents, playing the part of the concerned, dutiful son they wished they had. He and Clara's father wore almost identical navy blazers. They looked like a team. Clara and I were the opposing team. We stood by Maya's wheelchair, a small island in a sea of judging eyes. Clara's hand was linked in mine, her fingers cold. I squeezed it gently. "I'm here." The family members milled about, casting furtive glances our way. They'd all been primed by Julian's narrative: Clara, the unstable daughter, and me, her bizarre, inappropriate prop. The confrontation came just before the cake was to be cut. Clara's mother, a woman with a permanently worried expression and diamonds at her throat, cornered us near the bay window. Julian, naturally, glided over to join them. "Clara, we need to talk," her mother began, her voice low and urgent. This has gone on long enough. This is a farce. A superintendent? Is that the life you think is right for Maya?" "He has a name, Mom. It's Leo," Clara said, her voice tight. "Julian has a comprehensive plan for Maya's care." Her father chimed in, stepping up beside his wife. "A private facility. The best doctors." "A facility?" Clara gasped. "She doesn't need a facility. She needs her home. She needs me." Julian stepped forward, placing a placating hand on her father's arm. He spoke to Clara, but his words were for the benefit of the relatives who were now openly listening. "Clara, be reasonable. We all just want what's best for Maya. Everyone can see you've been under a lot of stress. This arrangement," he gestured toward me, "is just another symptom." A cry for help. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at Clara. Their faces were a gallery of pity, disapproval, and morbid curiosity. They were waiting for her to crack, to scream, to prove Julian right. I could feel the tremors running through her hand. The storm was breaking, right on top of her. My father's words echoed in my head. "Be the wall." I didn't engage them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list my qualifications or argue about my suitability. That would be playing their game. Instead, I let go of Clara's hand, stepped forward slightly, and put myself between her and her parents. I looked past them toward the center of the room. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tense silence. "I think Maya wants to open her presents." It was so simple, so unexpected. It completely changed the gravity of the room. I turned, took Clara's hand again, and gently led her back toward her sister, leaving her parents and Julian standing there, their mouths slightly agape. I hadn't won an argument. I had simply made their argument irrelevant. I knelt down beside Maya's wheelchair. She looked small and scared, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She'd been watching everything. "This one is from me," I said softly, handing her a small, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small, beautifully crafted wooden box I had made in my workshop. She lifted the lid. Nestled on a bed of dark velvet was a single, pressed and preserved Edelweiss flower. "Clara told me you like plants that are tough," I explained, my voice just for her. "This one grows on the highest, rockiest mountains. In the wind and the cold. A little bit of resilience. I thought you'd appreciate it." Maya looked from the flower to my face. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Leo." She looked over at Clara, and the smile they shared was a conversation all its own. Said, "He gets it. He gets us." That was the crack. The moment the narrative broke. My simple, quiet act of thoughtfulness was something Julian, in all his slick charisma, could never replicate. It wasn't the gesture of a man in a farce, it was the act of someone who listens. Someone who pays attention. Someone who cares. I saw the shift in the room. An aunt who had been frowning at me now looked thoughtful. An uncle nodded slowly. They looked at Julian's expensive suit and his rehearsed concern. And then they looked at the handmade box and the quiet smile on Maya's face. For the first time, they seemed to doubt the story they'd been sold. Julian saw it too. A flicker of pure fury crossed his face before he masked it with a tight smile. He had no defense against simple decency. His storm had crashed against a quiet wall and dissipated into nothing. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday. The trust had matured. The papers were signed. Maya and Clara were financially independent. They were safe. The war was over. There was a soft knock on my workshop door. It was Clara. She stood in the doorway, not quite in and not quite out. "The 6 months are up," she said. Her voice was flat, uncertain. I came to say thank you for everything. You kept your promise." "You're welcome," I said, my own voice feeling thick. I looked around my workshop, at the neat rows of tools, the coils of wire, the quiet, gray order of it all. For the first time in a decade, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage, a tomb. I didn't want to go back to being a ghost. "I don't want to go back," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "To before. To this," I gestured around the basement. "This isn't my life anymore." I looked at her, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. "It wasn't pretend for me, Clara. Not for a long time." Relief and fear warred in her eyes. "It wasn't for me either," she whispered. "I kept waiting for the pretend part to feel real, but it was the time between the performances, the time just talking to you, that felt like my actual life." She stepped into the workshop, closing the door on the rest of the building, on the rest of the world. "So what do we do now?" "We stop pretending," I said. 1 month later, I was helping her pack. Not for a divorce, but for a move. We found a bigger apartment on the other side of town. One with a spare room. We painted a sunny yellow for Maya and a balcony big enough for a small forest of pots. I was covered in paint. She had a smudge of it on her nose, and we ordered pizza and ate it sitting on